Welcome back, everyone. Do we have everybody in? Cameras on?
I've just put the request out there, Juliana.
Oh, thank you.
Just make sure. David
Oh, the
Leposki.
speakers.
David Leposki, can you hear me? New Zealand, David Leposki.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. I just switched you. Oh, yes, you were back on the starship. Brilliant.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
David, just give me the heads up when we are ready to get back started.
But it would be cool if we panelists could stay in touch, as well as with our New Zealand friends. I would welcome that opportunity.
I could probably distribute some email addresses afterwards if everyone was happy with that.
Yeah,
That would be
our
great.
last.
Yeah,
our
it's
last,
perfect. Do it.
Our
Yeah, you can
last.
put my phone number and email. That'd be great.
Okay, I'll take care of that. David Cullen speaking.
Our last session will be about taking action, and we will cover that as well. So if we can get back to keep going. So we're heading out to topic 6, 5, and 6, and we're just gonna invert the order of things. So topic 5, we talk about the tactics, and topic 6, we talk about how to work with the media. As I said before, Olivia, she's a journalist in New Zealand. Olivia, share with us how we can best engage with media in New Zealand. How do we get, this we're discussing today on the front page?
I mean, the first thing I would like to ask is, what are you already doing? Because I'm sure this is not a blank page. So you're asking us, I think it'd be important for me, at least, I'm sure for everybody else, to get a better understanding of what you've been doing on this or other issues. Do you have people within the media who are supportive of what you're doing? Do you have opposition within the media? Do they know anything about this at all? Are they supportive more generally on disability issues? Do they have kids or partners with disabilities? Or like, what do you know so far and what are you doing?
Okay, Judy, so Olivia is going to address that. She is a person with a disability that is a journalist, and she's working in one of the main media outlets in New Zealand.
Yeah, I can talk more about that now. So
Olivia, could you just repeat the question? I just missed this question, I'm sorry.
Okay, so the question was actually directed to Olivia as a journalist in New Zealand, how we best engage with the media and how do we get this, what we're discussing today, on the front page. So Olivia will give us an overview, will give us the context of the New Zealand media and how disability is portrayed in New Zealand media. And then we can open the floor for the panelists to give us some insights and share their experiences. So back to you, Olivia.
Yeah, thanks. So I have been working at Stuff for nearly 4 years, which is one of the biggest media outlets in New Zealand. So we have stuff.co.nz, which is a news website, and we also have daily newspapers, weekly newspapers, and things like and community papers around New Zealand. So I guess stories about disabled people haven't always been done well, not just here, but across the board. Often the stories are framed very negatively, or we see stories about kind of like the inspirational porn type stories. So I guess for me in my role, this year I've started as a reporter specifically focusing on disability issues. And I guess coming from a perspective as a disabled person myself, I live that. So I have a lot to learn, but I can understand the lens of disability, and hopefully that means that people feel more comfortable to share their story with me. It also means that we have a dedicated, I guess, resource to tell stories about disabled people that a busy mainstream newsroom may not typically have the resources to have. In terms of how we can best engage, how advocates, organizations can engage with media, we get pitched a lot of stories that are obviously important to tell. And I think it's more issues based, whereas I think it was mentioned before, it's the personal and individual stories and case studies to illustrate that issue that always does well in terms of storytelling. So if an audience or a reader can empathize with the person they're reading about, that will be more effective than a general story about negative statistics about disabled people accessing places. So it's about those personal stories, and those will get on the front page compared to a story about data or statistics.
Thank you so much, Olivia. I will make a few remarks as well. So, as I said, I'm originally from Brazil, and in Brazil, I was running a TV show called Make a Difference, and we were always, telling stories and getting insights and showing, bringing awareness to the wider population. And we use actually a lot of the TV show to put pressure on government on the various issues, that were systemic issues. I need to reiterate, powerful stories can change the world, And I noticed that here in New Zealand, there is a lot of fear of speaking up. Several times when I kind of work as a bridge within the disability community and the media contacts that I have, a lot of people, they are scared of speaking up for fear of backlash, retaliation. And I can't reiterate enough that in fear, we lose power. So we need to speak up. We need to tell our stories. I will now open the floor for our panelists again. I think Judy, if you want to comment, you were the first one asking for some information about, the New Zealand context.
And thank you, Olivia, for what information you shared. Again, I think we've all been discussing this to some degree about the importance of media. Here in the US, the New York Times has really been doing some good work in the area of disability, including on a regular basis having articles, opinion piece articles. And that may be something that you want to see if one of your major outlets would be willing to look at doing something like that. It would be interesting to hear what's going on in Australia and Europe. But I think here we've definitely, because of more voices of disabled people in general, but also disabled people in journalism, there's been more attention. So the New York Times, for example, has done what they were doing in the area of women, because many women had not had obituaries written up in the New York Times who were women of note, but they have over the last couple of years, in addition to addressing that on women, have been addressing the issues of disabled leaders who've passed sometimes many years ago to bring that forward. But if you go back and look at the New York Times, you'll see the breadth of the articles that they have on a regular basis. And this, I think, is definitely bringing attention to disability in a much, much broader way, because it's just, disabled people, obviously, who have great skill in being able to write clearly with clear messages. But I don't know how many have come out now, because it's been going on for a couple of years.
David, you want me to jump in?
Please, David, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, coming after Judy on this topic is really tough because she is like the role model of how to do this. But let me offer you 3 quick points that may help. The first is you need to find friendlies in news organizations. The same way you've got to find friendlies within government, you'll find some reporter or columnist or editorial writer or whoever, and they will become your internal advocate. You can't say, will you be our internal advocate, and they can't say they're being that. It's a bit of a dance, but that's what you need to find. The second thing is, in this current era of media shrinking, the old way of getting a story, sending them a news release, it isn't, at least here, it may be different there, but it isn't the way a lot of stories come about. What we are finding increasingly is the first place stories get attention is when they're on social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. So when one of my students, I wasn't responsible for this, I don't claim any credit for it, but one of my students who's in a wheelchair at our law school found that the university wasn't shoveling the snow adequately between the law school and the dormitory. She had a friend shoot a video of her trying to get through the snow, and that video went viral, and the next thing you know, she was all the heck over the news. And then we added the overall commentary from the story of this individual to why the government's falling down and enforcing the law or whatever the issue may be. The social media, and what I'm finding increasingly here at least, is that the media the conventional media are reading social media and the grabbing stories from there. And also generating your own story in its entirety. As a couple of you know from the last time I had the privilege of being your guest there, I've shot a couple of videos. A sighted person did the actual shooting of it, where we would go into a brand new building and illustrate with my narrative how it was an accessibility disaster, to explode the myth that new buildings are accessible. It's just the old ones that are terrible. And by strategically choosing what to focus on and how to do it, that video has been seen thousands of times and has had a lot of impact, including generating news coverage. In other words, if I had called a news organization and said, did you know the so-and-so building has got accessibility problems? They'd like say, thanks very much, call us when you got a story. But when I said, hey, there's a video online that's getting a bunch of uptake on the same thing, all of a sudden it's a story. And some journalists actually covered that story without going to the building, just relying on my video. So to some extent, you could generate your own news that way, and then the conventional media follow. The final thing I want to suggest to you is your Radio New Zealand, from when I was last there, has a lot in common with our CBC here in Canada, and they love panels. And if you put together for them 2 panels to do on successive mornings on that 9 to noon program, one of people in New Zealand talking about the barriers they face, one person with vision loss, somebody with a mobility issue, somebody with mental health issues, and then offer them a panel of, dare I say it, some of the people you got on this this program, this Zoom meeting today, to say, let's get an international perspective on how well New Zealand is doing and how are we losing out. You're then getting automatic national coverage right there. And that kind of thing will help get local newspapers to pick up the story more, I should hope. Back to you.
Thank you, David.
Oh, and by the way, I'm generously volunteering all of our time, and I expect my colleagues on the panel to generously volunteer my time as well.
Yeah,
back to you.
Everybody's volunteering their time, and we really appreciate. Michael, please, can you go ahead?
Volunteering our time, and it's a wonderful thing that we're doing. And I really commend New Zealand for organising such a great panel, and what we've got 110 participants at the moment. It's a great achievement, and more power to everybody involved. I suppose an observation about the media is that we all know that the news is about issues. It's about Ukraine, it's about China, it's about issues always, and it's very hard to get these sorts of matters into the mainstream media. I suppose the ones that we've found have been successful is where the programs concentrate on people's ability rather than the disability. And I think one good example of that is in Western Australia, there's a guy called Jordan Steele John, who some people may know or know of. Now, he's known as the youngest person in the Australian Senate. That's his ability. He also happens to be a guy in a wheelchair, but he is leading the Greens out of Western Australia, very proactive, just like Judy. And Judy, your stellar career. It's about the ability, not about the disability. And I think we can profile so many people on this panel and probably in this group who've got great abilities and great achievements. And then you start to put a positive story about this whole issue. And maybe that's another opportunity for the media. Thank you.
This is Judy. If I could just, Michael, I think in the United States, and I'm not sure about other countries, but the word ability here for many is not an N word. So I think what we're looking at is disability and people with disabilities. And for me in particular, I don't like the word ability because it implies that if you don't have a disability, you have ability in every area. And therefore, if I say I have a disability and I can't walk. So I just think that we're wanting to highlight people who have a breadth of knowledge and experience and can tell their story and can be political leaders or whatever. But I don't know about New Zealand, but definitely that language doesn't fly here.
Thank you, Judy.
And language is always evolving.
Sorry.
No, this discussion is real, and language is always evolving, you know. So now we say people with disabilities or disabled people. The term might change in the future. The language is a work in progress. I can see Jared has the hand up. Please, if you can unmute yourself, and thank you.
Yeah, I guess, language is very context specific, of course, and in Australasia we have our own vernacular. But I have no media experience whatsoever. Just an observation. It seems to me that the recent COVID-19 policy changes seem to be quite heavily influenced by a lot of international media. It was like no one really cared until The Guardian got hold of the article about the pregnant journalist, at least in terms of shifting. And it could be just pure coincidence, but at the same time, if you can use allies, and The Guardian is probably a good one. I think they have a good good coverage of disability rights issues. And then, I don't know to what extent it's possible to do TV type stuff with if someone's willing to talk about their own challenges and accessibility, something to tug on the heartstrings. I mean, it seems it's difficult for me to even suggest these things because this is a matter of human rights. These are obligations the state has assumed when ratifying the CRPD. So then in a way it's trying to it almost feels like a slightly a play on a charitable approach, but I guess in the end you have to do whatever works with the short-term goal. So yeah, good luck with that.
Thanks, Jared. Catherine, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So this is really a challenge for us for example, European level media, because the topics are the hot political topics of the day. So it's not often possible to get attention, although pieces of legislation get attention, and the media, we don't do too much on the individual stories thing. Like we do additional bits which include testimonies and so forth, but we try and put the legislation front and center. Journalists are usually happy and interested if we are really pissed off. So if we're very, I put here, we put some of the media coverage that we have on our website, and it's often because we're not happy with something. So if we say, oh, this is a great thing that has just been announced, they don't care too much. But linking to the topics of the moment, and you can link accessibility to all of the topics of the moment. I think usually you can, because you can find ways that the situation can be improved and advanced by the legislation if it comes up well. And it's true, it's the same here as well. Things get picked up now from social media. When you present things in a very catchy way, it's picked up. Rarely picked up from the things we sent out, and often we just get cold calls. Like with a short turnaround, we would like somebody to discuss on this. And if we're not able to find somebody with exactly that experience and knowledge with a disability within, you know, half an hour, they find somebody else. So I think being visible and findable very easy, but all the other tips I think are the media is transforming all across the world in the same way, in the same direction, isn't it? In terms of being more populist and so forth. But I've also looked at the what comes from the New York Times and the Guardian has been also really good quality. It's hard on journalists. One of the people said in the chat box, I really think it is hard on journalists.
Thank you for your remarks, Karen. I think being pissed off, it's very helpful. You know, we have our reptilian brain that is always looking for threats. So if we have something negative, all the attention goes in there. And we have so many examples and stories that we can use to do that. I just want to say, give an update from our technical here, that we had some technical difficulties with spotlighting the speakers and interpreters, but now we are back on track. We have a question from the audience. It's actually Gerald to Olivia. You have online print media covered, Olivia. What is like TV3 One News? I think he's wanting to know more about the TV space for disability.
Yeah, so I'd say most New Zealanders on this call would know that we do have a show on TV1 called Attitude, and they are a documentary style show looking at disabled people in their lives. So we do have that show, but in terms of news and news outlets, I don't know if any other news outlets have an openly disabled reporter who's just focusing on disability issues, as we do here at Stuff. We actually have a couple of disabled reporters here, so that's quite unique. And but in terms of TV coverage, I guess one of the strengths there is, you know, the 6 o'clock news where it's prime time and you have a lot of attention, and having I guess the TV element, the video element, and visually illustrating issues is often a lot more impactful than a printed article. But I think, all media outlets, not just Stuff, have a long way to go, although there has been progress.
Thank you. So we cover pretty much our 7 topics, our 8 topics nearly there. The topic 7 was activating the power of social media, and we kind of already speaking to it. Now it's time to take action. So we want to have everybody in this call right now to take on social media and do like a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram like storm. You can, for example, take a print screen of our amazing panelists, say that you are now, you know, in this group trying to find ways to pretty much advance the rights of people with disabilities in New Zealand. We want you to get ideas of actions that can lead us to succeed with the accessibility legislation. Put your ideas on the chat. And finally, by the time that the bill is to be presented, if government hasn't listened to us, we can start organizing our very own protest, very own CRIP camp, take on parliament, and make sure that we have the accessibility legislation that we want and we deserve. I think from our panelists, if we can ask, there was idea of an open letter. Maybe we can come together after this meeting and put together a manifesto, try to get some media from your own countries and regions, and pitch some stories, how the disability advocates in New Zealand are tapping into the wisdom of your very own selves to achieve greater accessibility here in this country. So pretty much come together. one thing that really, it's kind of specific for New Zealand, there are a lot of silos, and there is a lot of lack of unity within the disability movement. So the groups do not come together for that big picture and that same ideal. Is that something that happens as well in your country region? And how do you do to unify the movement? Or not even unify, but make people pass through the differences and come together for the greatest and bigger goal? Judy, you have your hand up.
So I would say that in a country the size of the US, obviously everybody doesn't agree on everything. But I think what we've seen over the last really 50 years is that people have recognized that we need to come together. And it was made very clear from many legislators that if we couldn't bring our voice in a more unified way, they would join no one because they didn't want to offend anybody. So again, as I said, there are always differences, which is one of the reasons why the Access Board is really important, because the Access Board brings these different voices together, both from within the disability community and then from within government. I think over the years, we've gained more sophistication in recognizing that we have to work more together, try to iron things out in a way that we don't look so divided. And I think we've been reasonably effective in this area, which is why we ultimately were able to get things like Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act and numerous other pieces of legislation, which, you know, we might say have faults in many different ways. But I think ultimately, what we've also seen is organizations that take leadership role in litigating in certain areas. So groups like the National Federation for the Blind are very, very involved in litigation, and many other law groups. Dread the protection advocacies is a whole really new culture that's evolved.
Thank you, Judy.
This is David.
Hi, David. Yeah.
So I just wanted to add to what Judy was saying. Before the ADA was passed, one of the ways that we were successful in getting it passed was by working in coalitions. So the disability community had this organization called the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, which is cross-disability, Washington-based. You know, we would lobby on different issues. So that was working in coalition. But in order to be really successful, what we did was we partnered with this other group called the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. And together, we were able to lobby for the ADA. And it was that togetherness that really brought the ADA, you know, over the finish line. Because the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights was, I mean, is a powerhouse organization that will take on Supreme Court nominees, you know, various issues. Whereas the disability, you know, organization, the coalition, you know, maybe didn't have that level of emphasis, but together, it was a tremendous movement. And then I just wanted to add a couple of things in case I don't have the opportunity at the end. One of the things that we've seen in modern years is that more and more people with disabilities became leaders and spokespersons, both in terms of nonprofit organizations and in government. And I think that has been very important. And so you need to really, you know, try to cultivate leaders that can have an influence. And then finally, one of the things that that we did to help take the, you know, the argument away about cost was, and this is completely separate from the ADA, but there are tax deductions and tax credits that businesses can take to help, you know, implement legislation. So that's a strategy that you might think about if cost becomes an issue.
But I do want to very much emphasize what David said about the Leadership Conference. The Leadership Conference in the 1970s, when 504 came through, 504 really was the precursor for the ADA, and much of the ADA comes out of Section 504. But when 504 came through, and it was such a coalition that worked on that, that's when the Leadership Conference was approached by a group called the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. And over that 40-year period of time, you really see a greater engagement from the civil rights community, which has been very, very important, exactly as David was saying.
Thank you.
It's David, can I
Catherine?
jump in?
Just a second, because Catherine has been with
Oh,
us
sure, go ahead, go ahead.
for some
Sorry.
time now. Yeah. Go ahead,
I
Catherine.
don't mind. Anyway, I say quickly.
Ladies first.
It's actually really convenient for politicians if you're divided, because then they can say the disability movement anyway doesn't know what it wants. Everyone's got a different opinion, and they can also listen to the most friendly voices. So it's really like, I would say, like, we spent almost as much time on the internal negotiations and discussions during the negotiation of certain legislation as we did externally. So when we go externally, we're on one page, because, and there, like, you can have one page literally with what you need, because you've already clarified at the beginning the things you want to have in it in terms of the scope, the standards, the enforcement, get everyone to agree on the broad lines, you know, kind of make a joint, big, shared letter with all of you without the idiosyncrasies that the different organizations need to see or want. But I think that if you can invest in that, if it's possible, sometimes it's very broad lines that you can just agree on. But if you can show a united front on the important things, then I think that will be extremely helpful for you afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you. And David or Michael, who would like to go first?
I'm easy. Michael, do you want to go first?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, guys. Look, I just think that, you know, we're focusing on New Zealand. We've got a quarter of an hour or so left, and I think it's important that we try to sort of consolidate some of the terrific comments today. I really like what Catherine was saying earlier about the key issues of media and alliances and identifying enemies. You know, they're really such important strategic goals for New Zealand that we need to find the best way to work with the media to get the stories out. And we've talked about language and all the other things that need to be addressed when we talk about media. The alliances are so fundamental, and we've talked a lot about that. And as Catherine and many have said, and we've had similar things in Australia, there are enemies everywhere at political level, at industry level, all sorts of enemies. So you've got to develop strategies for handling those enemies and bring them on board. I remember once we had a major problem with a building industry organisation, the national body in Australia, who were absolutely undermining our standards. And we all talked. I was the chair of the committee, and I said one day, well, I'm going to go and see him. And we met this guy who was the head of the enemy. And I went to him and he said, what are you here for? I said, I'm here to invite you onto our committee. And he was so shocked that he agreed. So our enemy became a member of the committee. And that's effectively how we got legislation, because we agreed to compromise reasonably so that the enemy became our ally. So maybe the enemy lesson is to work with your enemies and include them and involve them, because people are enemies usually hopefully for a rational reason. Often it's irrational, but I think you've got to really respect the enemies and try to embrace them and say, well, what is the problem? Can we work together? Can we solve this together? And we've done that many times in Australia, I think successfully, to try to get everybody working together on this important legislation. And the only final comment I had, I know in New Zealand, I've said before, you've got the 2004 Building Act, and you do have a New Zealand access standard, which is broadly modelled on, if I may say, an older version of the Australian standards. I think it was about 2010, something like that. Are those two documents, the Building Act and that New Zealand standard, enforceable in New Zealand? Thank you. Maybe somebody can answer that.
So they are, I can bring up here the information based on the report. There was a legal independent report making New Zealand accessible. And so the standard and the act are focused narrowly on accessibility in areas to which members of public are likely to be admitted. It contains some drafting that permits a high degree of interpretation. That's a problem. For example, might be expected. So it's not clear from the act or the standard how it is to be enforced by people with disabilities and what stage it is to be enforced against builders, building owners, etc. So there is no teeth.
Well, if I say, Julianne, if I may say, I think it's absolutely fundamental that you have with respect, a better answer to that question. I think you need to know exactly what is the current legislation. You have a Building Act, you have a New Zealand standard, you've got various things like that. I've seen nothing in the document circulated. I think I asked the question a while ago. I think it's, if I was a politician, I'd probably say, well, what's the problem? We've got the Building Act, we've got a New Zealand standard. What's the problem? I think you've got to really analyse and summarise the legislation that's currently in place. And maybe that's the way you can move to get better legislation. And I think you're losing that opportunity of the legislation that's currently in place. You know, a government in New Zealand has passed that legislation. 2004, they passed the Building Act. Someone's adopted the New Zealand standard. I think you really need to be on top of that as a springboard for better legislation. I think, final comment on that, we've always taken the view in Australia that access legislation is progressive. No legislation in the world is perfect, and feedback you get from legislation simply makes it better. So our legislation is amended every couple of years. The next major amendment is in September this year, which will be a very holistic review of the building standards and so on. And that happens every 3 years in Australia. And that comes from consultation from people. People can comment about anything they like. And that really moves the legislation forward in a progressive way. So I think in summary, you've got to understand the current legislation and work on a progressive framework to get better legislation. Thank you.
Just as a footnote in the chat room, it says there's guidance, not requirements. And there's a link there.
Thank you. So back to the action, taking action.
Okay, let me focus on that if I may.
Yeah.
Let me. I know we're getting near the end, and I want to end on a really positive note, because I think you've got a ton of good ideas, but I want to focus it a little bit. Number one, you folks in New Zealand have two huge assets already in place that build upon what my colleagues have been saying. The Access Alliance exists. It is the model for building the movement and advancing the cause. So you don't have to create that. You got it. The second thing is the Access Alliance has a set of principles. They're clean, they're strong, they're good, and they have universal appeal. There is no one who can argue against them. Now, so you've already got that. I'm going to take a slightly different approach than some of my colleagues took. I don't look for united front. Where we can, it's great, but I don't look for unanimity. I look for harmony, because if you go for unanimity, all you need is one dissenter and you've empowered them and you've risked losing everything. I know my friends aren't talking in that kind of simplistic terms, and I don't want to impute that to them, but I think you've got enough support around the Access Alliance agenda, and it is a good agenda that you got what you need to move forward. If some people come along and say they want more, that's democracy. That's great. Some people come along and say they don't want it. Well, that's fine too. But what I suggest is your next step tomorrow morning is a letter to the Prime Minister of New Zealand from the Access Alliance. And it should be a letter which will be self-explanatory in the hand of any reporter, and it should have a few questions. It should ask for a meeting. It should say that you're happy they're looking at legislation, but they're on the road to missing a huge opportunity. It should ask for a meeting with the Access Alliance, but also, if my colleagues are agreeable, it sounds like they are, offer a chance for her to speak to us. And then it should ask some very specific questions about the shortcomings. Will you agree to one-stop shopping rather than splintering enforcement among a bunch of organizations and government that have no expertise and are likely to be inconsistent? Do you agree that the public money should never be used to create new accessibility barriers, especially in New Zealand? Whatever list of questions, the reason I'm saying that, and they don't have to be attack questions, but they should be pointed enough, because then your media campaign can focus on that letter. Because what you really want more than anything is not the story to be on the front page, though if it is, that's fantastic. What you want are political reporters who ask the Prime Minister the questions in your letter. That's what you want to do. The letter becomes a platform for your campaign, but it also becomes a platform for if you're successful, getting some reporters to ask the Prime Minister's office these questions. And that will help you focus and move forward, especially now in this critical month before they actually get the cabinet vote to mandate the details in the bill. I hope that helps as a strategy, and I want to end where I started. It's really an honor to be with such amazing co-panelists and to be able to offer some ideas to help you out. Best of luck.
Thank you so much, David. I just need to mention, we do have some templates of letters that can be sent to Carmel Cepoloni, the Minister for Disability Issues. And we also have some tiles and materials, resources to use on social media. So you can all go to the Access Alliance website to tap into those resources. If we can have like a very quick around and have some final remarks from our panelists, that would be great. And then Olivia will make the closing remarks. We have now 8 minutes, so maybe 40 seconds for each panelist to do some final remarks. We can go with, who would like to go first? Okay, I can assign Judy. Let's start with you.
I want to thank you very much for being a part of this great panel. There's a lot of wisdom here. And I think what's very important about this panel is you have people from many different countries who have many different experiences. But I think we all agree that New Zealand needs to recognize that it is losing its standing on the world scene if it cannot demonstrate a commitment to basic accessibility. And that the voices of disabled people in New Zealand need to be empowered. And that I think everything we've been discussing about media and working with legislators, getting people to tell their basic stories, all these things are important. And obviously the work that you're doing is intended to have an organized campaign.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jared. I can see your hands up.
On what Judy said, New Zealand has, as I said before, had and claimed a leadership role promoting the rights of persons with disabilities internationally for 15 years or so. And now is the point at which it needs to reflect that commitment through domestic action. You'd think it would be straightforward, but it seems like it won't be. So I think you can rely on a large group of international stakeholders to support you in your work, including within the UN system. And yeah, I mean, it's an obligation, human rights obligation, a legal obligation, and also a moral imperative. And I hope that for all the lovely slogans about kindness that I see in the New Zealand media from Jacinda Ardern, that will be accompanied by some meaningful action. Good luck.
Thank you, Jared. Who would like to go next? Catherine?
Go ahead, Catherine.
David was asking for the floor. I
Okay.
would definitely.
Thank you. I appreciate being involved in this. It sounds like you've done a lot of work. Congratulations on that. I would say make us proud. Do better than what we've done, and learn from what others have done before you, and go even bigger.
Thank you so much. Michael, yes.
It's very hard to say much here. It's been such a wonderful session, and I just want to thank all the organisers for this session. It's been a pleasure to be involved. I suppose I've said a few times that I hope that New Zealand can take a holistic approach and not forget virtual access as well as physical access. You need to use that model I've suggested, the process of access, all the aspects of accessibility, that it's not just a building code, it's whole of government. It affects everything that happens in New Zealand. It's in called public and private environments. I see a note, one of the calls about your requirements don't include residential buildings. It's very important that it's holistic. It covers public and private environments and virtual transport, public domains, the whole big picture. So I would advocate a holistic approach, which is what we've tried to do in Australia. And again, thank you very much, Julia and Olivia and all of the team for organising this, and more power to the Access Alliance. And we look forward to participating in this ongoing mission and come out with a successful outcome. And remembering Don Mackay said, this is just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Catherine, now?
I want to thank you for inviting us and for organizing this evening. It was a great to listen to everybody and to hear what's going on there where you are, but also what other people have experienced. It's a really long haul. It seems like they're trying to go fast, but it seems also unrealistic how quickly the proposal is. You've got all of us to call upon at any time on different things where you want inspiration or support, when you want to get us to activate things on social media or in any other way, just you know where we are.
Thank you so much. This is just the beginning, and it's a really exciting beginning. Olivia, now I give you the floor so you can do the final remarks.
Do you want?
Oops. Yeah.
Sorry, it's David. I just was going to kick in with like two quick things. One is, if you want to learn more about what we're up to up here, or follow our social media campaign on Twitter, we're at AODA Alliance. Website, you can sign up to get our updates by email. That's www.aodaalliance.org, aodaalliance.org, and drawing on ancient Jewish tradition from Passover, but changing it slightly. Next year in Auckland, we hope.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That's great, David.
Great. So just to wrap up this amazing panel and session, I just want to thank you to all the panelists who've come around. I know some of you had to start really early, and for some of you, you've had to wrap up quite late in the evening. So we just really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And for me personally, I just have a lot to learn from all of you. I'll probably be in touch with my journalist hat on sometime very soon. Thank you to all our audience members for coming along, and I'm sure that there's been amazing pearls of wisdom that you can hopefully take into your own journeys of advocacy. Thank you to all the organisers, and I'm gonna wrap things up there. We're 1 minute early, which is amazing, and I'm sure you'll be getting some follow-up information from today's session about some action points moving forward, and yeah, how we can just improve the lives of all disabled people in New Zealand. So kia ora, everyone.
Thank you so much.